The Pacific Coast, the perfect combination of quiet coastal beaches and lush forests, places where unlimited recreational activities and wildlife abound. The scenery along the coast complements the Pacific Ocean, and both the locals and the tourists enjoy the peace and serenity there. But it wasn't always that way. Let's go back about 70 years, around 1941, and the start of the Second World War. Most people don't know that the West Coast was the only point on the American mainland to be hit by the shells of enemy submarines during the early stages of the war. And even though a great deal has been written and discussed regarding the major battles from World War II, there is still more history waiting to be told. Oregon coastal artillery and other defenses diligently watched the ocean. Coast guardsmen on horseback and even civilian reinforcements patrolled the beaches, watching for enemy submarines, just like the one that fired on the coastline in 1942. Later, patrol craft, subchasers, and other U.S. Navy vessels reportedly engaged at least one enemy submarine several miles off the coast of Pacific City, Oregon. This is where our story begins. In the spring of 1943, Robert Wood was a 19-year-old sailor assigned as a signalman aboard his subchaser, the SC-536. And although Robert will be 96 years old this Christmas Day, he can still recall the details of the events that began on May 19, 1943.
On May the 18th of 1943, the PC-815 was en route to San Diego, California, and of course, naturally had their sound gear going and picked up a ping from a submarine. I believe it was off Fort Myers, Oregon.
The soundman alerted the commanding officer of the PC-815, Lieutenant Ron Hubbard, and again confirmed for the lieutenant what he identified as the sound of screws from a submarine. It was wartime, so the PC-815 was sailing with a full crew that had been trained for action. After identifying the presence of one submarine that was deemed unfriendly, the soundman on duty and the sound technician responsible for the operation of the magnetic recorder soon identified the sound of a second set of screws in the water. The PC-815 reported the targets and prepared to engage the submerged enemy. Once in position, the range was determined and the first depth charges were dropped in an attempt to damage the submarine and force it to the surface. The lieutenant contacted the naval authorities in Astoria and requested reinforcements, additional ships, and charges to be dispatched to the location.
Knew they had to have some help. They had to have more depth charges, and they contacted the naval port at Astoria for us to come out and help them and to bring charges. So we round up the crew and started off without the commanding officer. Our executive officer was Lieutenant Kropke, who was very knowledgeable, and everyone could get along with him. So we started dropping charges, and we were also operating with two PCs and another subchaser and ourselves, and then another ship by it was C.H. Bonham, and two blimps. This was a new experience. We had never operated with blimps before.
As the additional ships arrived in the area, attack patterns were set up and additional depth charges were deployed. At one point, the sounds of blowing tanks could be heard below the surface, and several crewmen observed large amounts of orange oil boiling to the ocean's surface. The engagement continued. The morning of May 20th, 1943 began with coordinated attacks on the submarines between the surface vessels and the two U.S. Navy blimps. Magnetic sound contact was confirmed and provided by sound technicians aboard the blimps before additional depth charges were dropped. Sound information from one of the blimps indicated that one of the submarines had turned and seemed to be headed for shallower water. Surface vessels again pursued and attacked.
May the 19th and May the 20th. Those were the two busiest days. Um, and we dropped a lot of charges. And I believe the 815 seemed like it was 67 charges that they dropped. And I lost count of how many we dropped. I do know that the second day we ran out of depth charges, and of course, more was sent out from Astoria.
In the early evening hours of May 20th, the blimps used signal flares to indicate the location of the enemy submarine that had been detected. Charges were set to the appropriate depth and deployed by the SC-536. Crewmen aboard the blimps reported a direct hit on the target, something Robert Wood clearly recalls.
I communicated with the blimp quite a bit. Um, the uh, One time they sent a message that we had our depth charges had made a direct hit on the submarine, and that we had sunk the sub. So we didn't forget that message, and we were very proud of it.
On the morning of May 21st, the surface ships and crewmen continued to investigate the area that the ships attacked the night before. The soundman and sound technician on the PC-815 again reported the sounds of air tanks being blown below the surface and just off their port bow. They waited for a submarine to surface. Suddenly, the men on deck spotted a periscope that had risen up through a boil of orange oil. The barrel of the periscope was clearly identifiable. Gunners immediately swung the deck gun into position and opened fire. As a hail of bullets were fired toward the periscope, it disappeared back under the surface of the waves. Since the PC-815 was stationary in the water at that time, additional charges were dropped by the SC-536. Sound operators reported that the enemy target was distancing itself from the location of the 815, but was believed to be damaged because it departed at a very slow rate. According to declassified reports, the engagement with the submarines lasted for 68 hours. Depth charges were dropped for 55 hours. Formal reports to naval authorities in Astoria were submitted by the commanding officer of the SC-536, Ed Kropke, and from Lieutenant Hubbard and the PC-815. Those reports were dismissed. The highest-ranking officials, those who allowed U.S. Navy vessels to engage possible enemy submarines off the Oregon coast, now displayed skepticism.
And there was a station wagon waiting to take Lieutenant Kropke to meet with the Admiral in Seattle, Washington, which I guess was going to be about a 4-hour drive. That was before interstates. And so it was my job to type up the report from May the 19th through the 22nd of the sub chase. And of course, you know, when you're tired and sleepy, you don't type quite as fast as you would normally. And then, of course, Kropke was waiting to get the report to take to Admiral Fletcher for him to read. Of course, it was the wee hours of the time Ed Kropke arrived in Seattle, and he met the Admiral Fletcher. And so Admiral said, Kropke, you think you have sunk a sub in Astoria, Oregon. But let me show you, here's a map. And let me show you where Hawaii is and where Mariana Islands and the Marshall Islands and Guadalcanal. And it says the war is not in Astoria, it's in Guadalcanal, and you did not sink a sub. It was sad for us to hear that because we knew we had sunk a sub, and it didn't matter what Fletcher thought, and we have not given up the idea.
After the incident, the ship's logs and records were never investigated, and crew members were never formally questioned. Ironically, an official anti-submarine warfare report was filed and classified as secret. Authorities apparently chose to dismiss the incident, directed the crew to forget it happened, and that decision kept the truth from the American public. As members of the Oregon Coast Project team began to gather information, it quickly became apparent that we were dealing with a historical and significant event.
I was in about the fourth grade, and we got out for recess and we went outside and looked across the way, and the American Legion Hall was right across the way from the elementary school. We saw a bunch of men outside of the Legion Hall. They were all dressed in black watch caps, black sweaters, and black pants. The Coast Guard was around them. They had about 4 guards there, standing with the rifles pointed outward away from those men. They were not Japanese. They were white.
My mom mentioned the fact that one of her girlfriends during the World War II time was beachcombing between Pacific City and Cape Kiwanda and found a military boot on the beach and ran up to grab it, picked it up, and there still was a foot in it. So kind of tells me that maybe there's more to this, that there actually was something going on off of our coastline.
That one submarine that people have told me, they seen it being sunk, and as far as they found out later, it was in fact sunk.
A lot of times at night we heard boom, boom, because we were inland from the coast, and always it was supposedly what we were told was that there were subs out there. When you heard the depth charges, where you knew that they'd found a sub.
Yeah, in the early 60s, myself and 5 other divers, one stayed on the boat to take care of the boat, went down on a sub. I didn't make it. I made it to about, 45 to 65 feet. Had ear problems and vertigo, so started to get it. So I returned back to surface. And in about 20 minutes or half an hour, they resurfaced and said they witnessed the sub. They didn't say they got down alongside of it. They said they seen the conning tower. And it was, I think this was probably in June or July of probably 63. My best recollection anyway.
We moved over there in 1966, and I don't know what the time is between the time that he mentioned a submarine to me, but it was, I would say it was probably a year later after we moved out there. And it was, the information he gave me was very little. He just said that they thought there was a wartime submarine sunk off the coast, and he was consulted about going down, but then they decided not to do anything about it, just leave it alone. And I was not to mention it to anyone. He did tell me that, just gave me a hint of what he knew out there, but it was not to be discussed with anyone.
In 2008, a team of researchers and divers set out to locate wreckage in an effort to prove Robert Wood's story.
Looks like you have some maneuvering time. Right. Good luck.
In 2013, side scan sonar and echo sounding equipment at the project site captured the image of a structure that will be investigated soon. The Oregon Coast Project team is hopeful that using the technology of present will help uncover some of the mysteries of the past. The men of the PC-815, the SC-536, the SC-537, and blimps K-33 and K-39 shared the account of the incident for decades after the war. Of all the men who were there, only a few survive today. One man, Robert Wood of Union City, Tennessee, continues to tell the story.
Through the years, I've talked with so many different people who've heard about the story and read about the story and wanted to pursue it. And I'm glad that finally you folk are pursuing it, and I feel that you will find both subs.
His hope was always to share the account of what happened. He knew other young men like him might still be out there, unaccounted for. It was important to him, and he hoped at some point someone would listen. We listened, Mr. Wood, and after 7 decades, the Oregon Coast Project team is almost ready to tell the story.